So yeah. So hello everyone. As we know, accelerating economic growth and sharing the benefits of that growth to reduce poverty are not only the core missions of virtually all governments in the low and middle income countries, but also I suppose of most of the international development agencies as well as donor agencies and development partners who are working towards enhancement of population well-being across the globe. Understanding how demographic changes affect economic growth helps countries, particularly developing countries, allocate their scarce resources to accelerate economic growth and poverty reduction. For this, it is essential to recognize the potential value of research to better understand these key aspects and issues. Further, identifying knowledge gaps and outlining an agenda for promising questions and areas to investigate in, and research towards improvement in measurements and methods, including analytical methods, are, I believe, essentially important. Scientific and good quality research is fundamental for social science research to facilitate policymakers their short-term as well as long-term needs for useful evidence for the policy community in giving them definitive conclusions and evidence both. At the same time, quality research on how population dynamics, that is fertility, mortality, and migration, affect economic outcomes and the social and health needs of the people is important to identify the knowledge gaps that exist today in these areas. Thus, development of a research agenda to respond to the needs of any policy community is challenging, but significantly important to monitor progress of various development goals globally, nationally, and subnationally. What is going to be the likely research priorities which may be more relevant and aligned with the global and national agenda in order to investigate relationship between population health, including reproductive health, and population dynamics and key economic features at household, community, and national levels. Further, a special focus on the type of research that would be useful to economic and health sector policy making by national governments and the donor agencies. With this brief introduction to the session, on behalf of the IPSA, IIPS, and my personal behalf, I welcome you all to this very important session. We have four very exemplary speakers for the session that include giants in the area of health management, population issues, Professor G. Giridhar, and we have K.M. Satyanarayan, well known for his contribution internationally and nationally. We have Anand Sinha ji from Packard Foundation. Then we have our who is the fourth speaker? I have to remember the name.
Niranjan.
Niranjan, yeah, because he's not present, so I was not able to listen. Niranjan, who will be joining us shortly after he finishes his presentation in the another parallel session that is happening in the alumni meet on placement, etc. So he shall be joining us very shortly. And we have a discussant, Dr. Parveen Agrawal, who are going to elaborate to us on four key areas that we think is important from the research perspective in future, which includes SDGs, sexual reproductive and health rights, environment and climate changes issues, and RM and CHA. So what we will do is that we will have these four speakers in the order that is first Professor Giridhar would speak, that would be followed by our next speaker, who is going to be Mr. Anand Sinha from Packard Foundation, which would be followed by Dr. K.M. Satyanarayan, and finally Dr. Niranjan Sarguti. Dr. Parveen Agrawal would give his discussant opinion after four presentations are completed. We request each one to take about 10 to 12 minutes, and I shall introduce each speaker just before he presents his views in this session. So to begin with, as I said, our first speaker is Professor G. Giridhar. Dr. G. Giridhar holds a doctorate of science degree from Harvard and had been a professor at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad between 1978 and 1992. He was the director of IHMR in Jaipur before joining United Nations Population Fund in 1995 as advisor in management of population program. He spent 6 years as UNFA representative in Thailand, in Bangkok, and I think I have met him that time, and he offered me very nice lunch. One day I remember myself and Dr. Arvind Silva from Sri Lanka. So yes, I enjoyed that meal. Thank you very much, Dr. Girdhar. He was also director of some regional office in Bangkok. After retirement in 2009, he has carried out several consulting and teaching assignments with UNFP and other organizations and agencies, and has been very active academically. In collaboration with Professor James, Dr. Sanjay, Professor Girdhar has prepared a report on caring for our elders, early responses for India to the United Fund population in 2017. The report takes stock of aging situation in India, some of the concerns and policy and programmatic responses. It also presents good case studies and practices on elderly care across states. The report outlines the demographic and socio-economic status of the elderly and addressing gender and other key concerns in accessing social welfare services for the elderly. The analysis highlights the vulnerability faced by the elderly, particularly in the large proportions of the widowed women. Poor health and morbidity due to increasing NCDs is one of the concerns that he observed in his report. The challenges lies for the society and government to reduce vulnerability and improvement over well-being of the elderly. Dr. Girdhar in 2014 also co-edited a book on population aging in India, again with Drs. Satya, Sanjay, and Dr. Jain and Monir, which was published by the Cambridge Press University. Dr. Girdhar was a student of IIPS between 1969 to 71, and he wishes to greet his batchmates and others who may be attending this event. With this brief introduction, Professor Girdhar, it's our pleasure to have you, and now floor is yours, sir. Sir, you need to unmute, sir. Sir, you are muted. Sir, at the bottom, you would see mute, unmute. So you need to click on that, sir. ICT person, please assist him. No, sir, you are still muted, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. Sir, can you speak now?
Yes. Is
yes,
it okay?
We can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me
we
now?
can hear you, sir.
Okay, good. Very good. All right. Thanks a lot, Dr. Usha, for this longish introduction. The time is very short, 10 to 12 minutes, you said. I'll try to stick to that time.
Thank you, sir.
The subject matter of this session is basically funding opportunities for research in SDGs. Now, this session really talks about funding as the leading part of what we should all think about. For the time being, at least for my presentation, I would like to slightly modify the focus of my talk on research opportunities for attracting funding. You see, the difference is I'll focus research first and how we can get the funding for the research and so on. We may end up with the similar conclusions in both cases, but I think it's better to talk of what kind of research the IIPS in particular, everybody else, I focus on IIPS now, should be doing in order to attract funding from outside. There are many, many things one can do, and I have selected 4 or 5 of them and try to go through it, maybe a couple of minutes on each, and that would take care of the time that Dr. Usha has given me on this. The first one is really to do a scanning of the funding environment in order to understand or in order to maximize the matching between what the funding agencies want and what we as IIPS can offer, our capabilities and the funding available because each agency has got its own priorities for funding, and we need to recognize what priorities and go to the right agency with the right skills. I think IIPS is very well placed in this field uh, because you are doing teaching, stroke training, research, advisory services, or consulting services. You're doing all those things which fit into a similar pattern, and any funding agency should be attracted by an institution like IIPS doing all these four activities, and also of the kind of standing that IIPS has for many years. So it is basically for the first task, therefore, is to look for improving the matching between what you can offer and what they can offer, and they can fund. For a moment, I am playing the role of a funding agency. I'm pretending to be a funding agency. So I also have some funds available with me as a funding agency. So I'm looking for credible institutions and researchers who can do good work for me. So the interest is yours as much as the funding agency's interest. That's number one. Do a scanning of the funding environment. Secondly, there are multiple stakeholders as far as the SDG is concerned. The United Nations is a stakeholder, of course, probably a remote stakeholder, although United Nations only has sort of driven the SDGs, and there's a reason for that. The reason for MDGs and SDGs is basically that funding agencies were really not converging on the kind of funds that they're offering to different. There's all over the place, and therefore the universal goals like MDGs and now SDGs try to rally around all the funding agencies towards one big direction, so that money available, which is somewhat limited, is directed to one particular force. That's the basic idea with which United Nations has proposed SDGs in this. Government is a very big stakeholder. Civil society is a very big stakeholder. Okay. Private sector is media is a big stakeholder. And of course, we can't forget the community themselves as a major stakeholder of the SDGs, communities which will benefit by this and can offer support to this. Of all these agencies, stakeholders, government is perhaps the most important one, because after all, it is the government which has to really integrate all the SDGs in its existing programs. You can't have a separate SDG program and a separate government program. It has to be integrated within the existing government programs. This is exactly where IIPS can help the government, really, to help them to ensure that whatever that they're doing in the context of improved SDGs in India. I'm talking of India at this moment, but it is applicable to many other countries as well. So this is a very major opportunity for IIPS through research and more than research to gain a place at the table where decisions are taken. Okay, funding decisions are taken and research decisions are taken at that stage. So IIPS, being an institution of repute in the country in this area, must gain a space at the table in order to go in order to do this. So for this purpose, there is a need for moving away from heavily technical oriented demography, which I remember Dr. Srinivasan mentioning yesterday, that DTRC has changed to IIPS precisely because we need to move away from typical technical to more broadly based population sciences. In fact, population studies, and now it's become sciences in this. So there is a major opportunity for bringing for IIPS to bring all the stakeholders around a table. In fact, they don't talk to each other in the normal circumstances. So it's a good idea for IIPS to bring all of them to the table: private sector, government, United Nations, and civil society organizations, in a way that they can talk to each other, understand each other, and so on. This is a major opportunity for IIPS to continue doing in this. The next point that I'd like to make is that these goals, SDGs, are very large in perspective. Okay, for example, poverty, no poverty by 2030. Okay, Agenda 20, no poverty, no one left behind. These sound like cliches, but it's very important to break them down. All these big 17 SDGs, to break them down into meaningful objectives, sub-objectives, and the indicators that we have already that, so that people understand that if we produce these outcomes, then naturally we would be moving towards the SDGs. And this transition from outcome to SDGs is not a natural thing. It doesn't come to people straight away because they're getting so much involved in this. So IIPS can play a very important role in ensuring that people understand what these SDGs really are and how do we carry this forward. Then the fourth thing, I see the clock and it's getting a little late. Fourth thing is a very important initiative by the Niti Aayog in India and the United Nations for developing an index for SDGs. Many of you may be knowing about it. There's a very interesting work going on. At this moment, they have covered 16 goals and 115 quantitative indicators. It's coming up with an index for SDGs, and it classifies the states and union territories in India according to the performance on this index. And since it is a very heavily data-based index, IIPS has a natural strength in getting into this area. And how do we bring states which are lagging behind into the front on this is something that IIPS in its expertise can go. This involves a lot of research and a lot of advocacy as well. So that is the thing. And now I come to the final aspect, which Rajan may be very interested to hear this. Is there that, you know, in this index, there is one state in India that stands out as the top state, and that is Kerala. And it's important for us to understand how Kerala is been and currently is also leading the index on SDGs. How? What are the success stories that we can look at in Kerala and learn from others? You know, from other states, learn and so on. So this kind of documentation of Kerala experience and other success experiences in SDG must be carried out by IIPS. If these 4 or 5 sets of research activities that I talked about is carried out in IIPS, I think the funding agency will come running to the IIPS saying that, can you please do this for us? Because their interest is also to ensure that they get a credible, well-organized institution with teaching, research, consulting activities, data expertise, and kind of expertise that IIPS has got. They will come running to the institution for support. Okay, I stop at this. Thanks for this opportunity. If there's any other further points to discuss, I will be available later.
Thank you very much, Professor Girdhar. It was indeed a very exhaustive elaboration, if I could say so, on the components of SDGs on which institutions like IIPS and its researchers should focus their research in the coming years. That certainly is going to be very, very useful, I'm sure, the information that you have shared. And I'm very hopeful that we at IIPS will certainly take a note of it. Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Dr. Anand Sinha, and he will be talking to us about funding opportunities for sexual and reproductive health rights. Dr. Anand is the country advisor for the David and Lucy Packard Foundation, The Packard Foundation has worked for over 50 years with partners around the world to improve the lives of children, families, and communities. Anand comes with nearly 3 decades of experience in public health, primarily in reproductive, maternal, and child health in India. Before joining the Packard Foundation, he was Senior Program Officer at the Gates Foundation and led the Bihar Initiative. And before that, he was the Country Manager for APT Associates. He served Deloitte Organization as Director Strategic Planning and Research between 1998 2004 and IMRB as Associate Project Director between 1995 and 1998. Anand has co-authored several publications. A couple of his recent publications include Beyond the Statistics, Exploring the Process of Early Marriage Decision Making Using Qualitative Funding, Findings from Ethiopia and India, which was published in BMC Women Health. Another publication on what did it take to scale up the Sustain Udan, a school-based adolescent education program in Jharkhand in India, which was published in American Journal of Sexuality and Sexuality Education. And another important publication that I would want to highlight here relates to market-based partnership in health, which was a final evaluation report submitted to USAID India. So with that little brief introduction to Mr. Anand Sinha, I request him to present his views on funding opportunities for SRHR in India. Thank you very much, Mr. Anand. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, ma'am. You make me sound extremely knowledgeable and and an accomplished.
You are, believe me.
Which I'm not. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, really. And thank you for including me in this meeting. I realize I'm I'm a little bit of an outsider because I'm not from IIPS. Unfortunately, I confess I'm not a researcher, and I'm very grateful that you put the words doctor before my name, but my parents would have been very happy to see that. But alas, I am not a doctor. I am not a professor. I am just simply Anand. And I think that's important because the perspective I bring is really not from the researcher's perspective, but maybe more from just sort of thinking about my current role and previous roles that I've had as both sort of a program implementer and more recently as someone who works for donor organizations. I wanted to break up my sort of 10 minutes into 2 parts, really. One is just to talk about sort of what are the kinds of issues and topics that that some of, we were sort of brainstorming between myself and some of my colleagues to try and sort of list out saying what are the kinds of issues on which we think research, we would like to see more research, or we would like to see research being done. It may not be that there is much research existing at all on some of these topics. And then I think the other part is also just to think about the how do we do research, and maybe just some sort of thoughts from a funder's perspective on what might be the ways in which we think about doing research. So in the what part, I'm just going to sort of quickly list out, I think, maybe like 5 or 6 key thoughts or questions that were on top of our minds with respect to reproductive health primarily. I think a couple of them are emerging from the COVID context, the kind of changes that we are seeing, triggered by COVID. One of the things that we are recognizing that is happening quite a lot is that there's probably an increase in the range of sort of self-care or self-management that might have been happening with respect to COVID. And if we think about reproductive health services or products. And has that sort of self-care, whether it is in the field of, contraception, or whether it was even with thinking about accessing, medication, abortion over the counter, how has that sort of changed the power dynamics that exist between clients and providers? Has it led to greater dissatisfaction? Has it led to greater satisfaction of outcomes, both from a client's perspective and from a clinical and health sort of, morbidity and mortality perspective? What are we learning about this sort of the change as we saw access to health systems and healthcare providers being restricted? How has that potentially empowered or not empowered clients and users to take care of themselves. I think building upon that same theme, one of the things I know that we have often thought about is how do we do a better job of measuring client satisfaction beyond the clinical outcomes. Looking at sort of, I think we see a lot of studies at times which tell us that client satisfaction with services, reproductive health services, tends to be very high. And then when we actually look at those services, well, we see, well, maybe those services weren't actually of the, of the highest standards that one would want. But is the client actually always right? Is the client actually always the person who, who observes this in the minutiae and in the details? That is needed, and what might be new ways or sort of innovations in measuring that client satisfaction in a way that it could also be inbuilt into the health system itself. So it's not that it needs to be an external institute doing these studies, but it's an external institute like IIPS demonstrating how this could be inbuilt into health systems, day-to-day self-monitoring mechanisms. Another issue I know that we're thinking a lot about, and there's a lot more conversation that's happening amongst many donors and people who work in the development sector, is thinking about issues like diversity, inclusion, equity, rights, and justice. These are big buzzwords at this moment in time. Especially I think within international philanthropy maybe. And I think the more and more that we look at sort of large data sets, I know this is a question that's been on our minds as we've been looking at the latest round of the NFHS data, is we're seeing, significant gains in places like Bihar, in UP, in a lot of reproductive health, family planning and reproductive health measures and outcomes. And I think the question that we're asking ourselves is, this is great, but how equitable has this been? How much has this been something that has affected all communities, all parts of the communities that we're dealing with? And what do we know about how well this has been provided with sort of a focus on being respectful versus being sort of top-driven programs? So maybe thinking about issues of rights and respect and issues of equity and inclusion as we are sort of evaluating some of these large data sets, I think is something that many donors are thinking about. With COVID, we've also seen a little bit of a burgeoning and exploration around digital health platforms. As access to health services became constrained, we've seen more and more people start exploring with chatbots, looking at telehealth models, looking at even online access to products, online pharmacies, etc. And I think one of the things that we are wondering about is if these are areas that donors are going to invest in and explore, then what are the ways of sort of measuring these outcomes? This is all happening virtually. Typically, the outcome is left at a product was purchased or a service was delivered, but did it lead to a health outcome? And how does one sort of think about demonstrating? And it may just be a very simple sort of methodology tweak that is needed, but it is, I think, one of those things that maybe there is room for some exploration and innovation. I think Professor Dr. Girdhar mentioned the fact of, I think, migration as one of the key aspects, and I know that's one of the key aspects that the Packard Foundation has been thinking about with respect to reproductive health. And it's not something that has been explored very well or very deeply with respect to reproductive health. It has been explored with respect to many other outcomes, whether it is livelihood, whether it is general health outcomes, but with respect to what happens in terms of family planning outcomes, access to safe abortion outcomes, how does migration play that role? And it's something that we're thinking about because we recognize that if it is an important factor, then our programs, many of our programs haven't taken migration into consideration when we're thinking about delivering reproductive health services. Migration has been a key part of thinking about immunization programs. About, in HIV, it was an important factor that we've studied deeply. So I think it's been studied very deeply in many other areas, but not so much so with reproductive health. And it's important because the assumption of reproductive health is that there is a couple there is a husband and a wife, or there is, there is a couple that is in a steady state, and so there is the assumption that there is a need for contraception or any reproductive health inputs. And finally, in the what list, I think the other one is the question of thinking about the roles of targets and incentives, and how does this impact both outcomes in terms of quantity, but more importantly in terms of quality. And when we think about quality, I think factors like thinking about care and respectful care that is provided to clients. How do factors like incentives and targets maybe create tension with those aspects? So these are some of the things that are sort of on our minds as we've been thinking about what are the things that maybe we would we would like to see an institution like IIPS sort of put its weight behind. And pardon my ignorance, but I suspect that many of these questions are things that you guys are already examining in tremendous depth as well. So I do not mean to suggest that these are not questions that you are not already examining. On the how list, I think there are a couple of thoughts that we have been sort of examining. One of the factors, again, that I think Dr. Girdhar mentioned is that the government is a very important stakeholder, and institutions like IIPS are deemed as being the credible and trusted partners who can present data to the government. I think we find it increasingly challenging, and maybe this is because I have worked within international philanthropy, so international philanthropy is, sort of credibility as a researcher is obviously not there because we're not researchers. But I think to see, an organization that is, that is sort of, a center of excellence within the country, and frankly, an center of excellence globally that is present within India, become that sort of provider of data and have that seat at the table with government to say, that these are data and these have an implication on policies, on programs, is an extremely important role that that IIPS has played, and I think will continue to play. And I know that that's one of the questions that several funders are sort of continuing to ask themselves: is how do we sort of create this body of centers of excellence which have the credibility, which have the heft, which have the seat at the table to speak to government and reflect an accurate mirror and an accurate representation of what is happening in various sectors. I think another thing that we're thinking about is how do we explore. We're learning a little bit about sort of equitable evaluation, and I think equitable evaluation, as far as I'm understanding it, it means sort of how do you engage people who are involved in program delivery? How do you involve the community in actually shaping the questions, the issues that we are exploring? And it's not an extractive form of research. I mean, I think that's the current tension that I'm sort of understanding that equitable evaluation tries to address, is that we tend to go into a community, take data away, churn it in our own sort of machines, and then give it to somebody else, and the community does not actually participate with that data, and the people who are actually implementing at the ground do not participate with that data. And can we think of data as being put more to the or equally put to the service of those people from whom we collect it, as it is put to the service of academics and policymakers, where it tends to go up. There's this sort of upward sort of stream of taking information. I think the other thing that is probably tied with that is just really sort of pushing the boundaries to think about how do we innovate in terms of communications, of communicating research. I think we have well-tested and highly respected sort of processes of publications, of peer-reviewed publications, which are which obviously have tremendous credibility, and so they are valued. But are there more ways of again engaging diverse audiences that can actually make this these data and this research have greater traction and greater meaning within the community? And I guess the final one is, at times we feel that in the reproductive health space, because we're dealing with so many issues that are, stigmatized, that have that we hesitate to have conversations around, that are difficult to sort of probe into. And I'm actually thinking about a lot of the work that we've been doing and sort of research that's been happening around abortion care, more than anything else, is we feel that we've sort of hit roadblocks in terms of the kinds of questions and the way and the depth with which we can understand the issues that influence decisions and user journeys with respect to these types of behaviors. And so, again, what is the exploration around methodologies? And again, just I think that there is significant opportunity to explore funding opportunities for just expanding the basket of methodologies and sort of expanding the basket of approaches we would use to investigate into some of those things where we feel that we've hit roadblocks and we're not really getting deeper and deeper understanding of some of these issues. Again, I am saying all of these things as a non-researcher, so I agree that there may have been innovations and there may be answers to which I'm not aware. But I'm, again, from my sort of position in a field that's quite removed from where many of you have expertise. These are some of the views I wanted to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anand. And I was not wrong when I said that you certainly have the knowledge on the issue that I requested to talk about. So you exceeded my expectation, let me tell you that. You made some very important issues, and I particularly want to emphasize on the issues that you talked on about issues of rights, equity, justice in the context of sexual and reproductive health, and also the how incentives or targets have actually affected the quality of reproductive health services, particularly in India. And if I could add a further flyer to it, maybe to the marginalized population. However, I was just wondering, and I'm sure we can take it up eventually for the discussion later on. I was wondering whether in this entire efforts of identifying areas for potential research in future, whether demand for data, particularly on sexual health rights, does that find any space? I would like certainly to hear your views on it eventually when we go into the discussion mode. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was certainly very, very useful. And I'm sure many of us are benefited from that. So thank you very much. Now we move on to our next presenter, who is going to talk on funding opportunities for environment, climate change, and how that relates to population health. And the speaker is none other than our very, very, very dear friend and product of IIPS, a very good personal friend, if I can add that also, Dr. K.M. Satyanarayanan. He has a doctoral degree in population studies and brings nearly 3 decades of experience in population and development, censuses and surveys in the East and South Asian region countries. He has been with the UNFPA for nearly a decade and a half and presently posted at the Demographic Republic of Korea. He was instrumental in initiating UNFPA's program on population aging research in India and other research studies aside, implementing capacity building initiatives on the interlinkages between population and development. He has several publications in reputed journals and has been part of an edited volume in population aging that I mentioned about when I talked about Professor Giridhar, which was published by Cambridge University Press. During 2011 census undertaking of India, he coordinated the UN Joint Support Initiative with the Office of Registrar General of India and the Central Bureau of Statistics for DPRK in 2019 census. So with this little background, and many of us know Satya very well. I can never bring myself to call him Dr. Satyanarayana, though in one email formally I have to write that. But to me, he is always Satya and would remain Satya to me, and Satya uncle to both my girls. A very, very admirable uncle, I must say. So with that, Satya, floor is all yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, Usha, I have a presentation.
Yes, and they would be sharing it. I have given it already to the team from organizing committee, and she would be sharing it.
Yeah.
Or you are sharing it yourself, Satya? Or they are
No,
doing
no.
it? Okay, fine.
No, I've
Yeah,
given
yeah.
the
So
rights. Yeah,
fine
yeah.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'm not speaking as a UNFPA person. It's more grounded to IIPS. That has helped us develop our career. I'm very happy to be sharing this forum with my professional guru, Dr. Giridhar, and also my good friend Anand. We worked together for many years, though on different aspects. My thinking too was it was similar to what Professor Giridhar, expressed. But being from UNFPA, I thought, I should put in some elements of UNFPA in the presentation. But, I won't, I think Anand has really spoken more from his perspective, as well as the perspective that the UNFPA looks forward to. I have generalized, the topic more from a research perspective. And as Professor Giridhar rightly said, when you have the strength, people would, come to you. So I have looked at it more from a Asia Pacific, perspective of the challenges for the next 50 to 75 years. So what are the emerging challenges and how we need to move forward on those emerging challenges is the thinking behind today's presentation. Next slide, please. Do I have the rights? Yeah. So, I thought I should start with a global perspective, of SDGs. When I looked at it, funding has always been an issue, and funding for research, funding for monitoring, evaluation, these are some back-end activities or operations where the funding is done on an ad hoc manner. So I thought, let me just see what is the funding requirement for the SDGs over the next 10 years. So it says that it is 50 to 70 trillion dollars USD is required over the next 10 years, which basically translates into 5 to 7 trillion for a year. But for developing countries, they need $4 trillion, and only $1.4 trillion are available. So there is a shortfall even at the programmatic level for funding the SDGs. What social needs are there, and what requirements are there? If you have to eradicate poverty, considering the international poverty line, which is 1.9 USD per day. So nearly 66 billion investments are required. Likewise, annual investment requirements are there for infrastructure, water, agriculture, telecommunications, energy, transport. All these sectors, they require 5 to 7 trillion per year. With COVID-19, the priorities of funding is also shifting, and it is going to impact the funding of SDGs in a large way. Next slide. So here, the latest UN declaration was from Addis Ababa, where the developed countries agreed to, fund 0.7% of gross national income to the developing countries. And here is the graph which shows how many countries meet the 0.7 cutoff. You can see only 4 or 5 countries, they meet the 0.7 cutoff. So I just wanted to highlight that there is an issue of funding even the SDGs, and there is dearth of funds at the SDG funding level for the developing world. The next slide. So these are some of the sectors I could pick from a UNDP publication. Different sectors, how many billions are required. and all these are in dollars, US dollars. So you can see the different sectors, how much funding is required. And here you can see for health what is required, for education what is required, ecosystem biodiversity, climate change adaptation, and climate change mitigation. You need huge funding for these areas, not undermining the other areas. And I think the address by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, this evening, which is morning to the UN General Assembly, would definitely focus on health as well as climate change. This is what I read, this morning in the news items. I think sorry. So I think even India is also, going to focus on the COVID, vaccinations, ensuring health services, and also looking into the climate change. But climate change, it cuts across the borders, and it's an international discussion, that is happening. And there have been a few protests following the COP meeting about 5 days ago on climate change. Next slide. See here, I'm just, as UNFPA, this is the latest strategic vision of UNFPA. It was just approved by the board a couple of weeks back. And this is going to be the focus of UNFPA from 2022 to 2025, but it also looks into the larger context of SDGs, the direct relationship or impact with the other SDGs, and the direct influence of UNFPA programming on SDGs. So I've just tried to list them. I'm not going to read, those things, but SDG 3, SDG 5, I think SDG 5, Anand very delicately touched upon the issue of rights, women rights. So here it is gender equality, empowerment of women and girls. Those are critical items which I would later deliberate a bit upon that. SDG 10, inequality, which has already been mentioned. SDG 13, climate change. There's a serious focus by all the government bodies as well as UN agencies. SDG 16, promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. The inclusion aspect of it comes in here. SDG 17 is revitalizing global partnership for sustainable development. And here, the sensors, data, everything is sitting as an indicator under SDG 17. And all these things would impact in reducing SDG 1, which is, no poverty. Theoretically, no poverty, that's more an advocacy, statement. But reducing poverty is the core of this thing. So within the strategic framework, if you see, the focus of UNFPA would be to achieve universal access to sexual and reproductive health, realize reproductive rights, and accelerate progress on the implementation of program of action of the ICPD. So there are 3 transformative goals here: ending the unmet need for family planning, ending gender-based violence, and humanitarian, I find it difficult to read, humanitarian practices, then ending preventable maternal deaths. These are the 3 transformative results, and how UNFPA would be focusing on, and where, how it is going to be enabled. Enabled aspect of it would be more, a cross-cutting thing where, data, human rights, and gender equality figure in, which is more of a cross-cutting nature. The core focus would remain on women, adolescents, and health, youth and health. So this would be the core, focus of UNFPA and how it's going to relate to the SDGs. So this is the strategic vision, and this would be the direction of UNFPA for the next 4 years. So the results of the focus during the next 4 years has to be felt during the framework of the SDGs. Now, next slide. Now coming to the challenges, the foreseeable challenges. I've taken a broader perspective of, Asia Pacific and China and India, in terms of sheer numbers, they form a large proportion of Asia and Pacific. So I've just tried to list a few challenges here. Substantial demographic, social, and economic differentials within the country and region. Managing the demographic dividend would be challenges, both the first and the second. Then the issue of climate change, there is also an excellent write-up today, from the perspective of WHO, which talks about air pollution. And the PPM, India is the second most polluted country in the world. This is the catch, the title of the article, that I read today. So global warming, I think the issues are very well known. Global warming, rising sea levels, and repeated typhoons, floods, droughts, soil erosion, and displacement of population and health hazards. So these are, the issues related to the climate change and the demographic shifts that are going to take place in the coming 50 years. Rapid urbanization and migration. And you can't look at this from isolation. You need to have a holistic perspective when you're looking at the population and developmental interrelationship. Then the inequalities and the emergence of digital technologies. See, from climate change, demographic shifts, inequalities, emergence of digital technologies, all this together contribute to the mega trends in the next 30, 40 years to come. So we need to focus more on the mega trends. The research for the future should tune to the mega trends. So what I feel is that we, as researchers, as students who are, in different grades of schooling within IIPS and even outside IIPS, I think you need to look at the emerging trends. It's not only the population trends related to age and sex structure, but I think you also need to see what is its impact on development and vice versa. And so based on this thinking, I have summarized, few areas that I think are important. There could be more areas, but I thought I should list few areas where, we need to focus more on. Next slide, please. So here, I see the potential areas. Well, I have been a bit biased on the first this thing, looking more from the UNFPA perspective. Studies on interlinkages from an ICPD lens of how investing in SRH will impact the SDGs. This could shed more policy and programmatic insights, and would be a very good advocacy tool both at the political level and the programmatic level. Just as an example, I've quoted, if you invest, money, then what are the benefits, which basically shows the linkages between reproductive health and the cost effectiveness of the intervention, and how do you, work out the economic benefit of it. So you can't look at this from isolation. You need to have a broader perspective. You need to see how it affects the people at large. So don't look at numbers as numbers, look at numbers as people. I'm just making a statement on this. And then I think we need to pursue more on policy papers, capitalizing the first demographic dividend and reaping the second dividend. There have been a lot of articles in India and even outside India. But I think the experiences of the second dividend has not been, explored much. So I think there is a need for looking into, few countries, even within the Asia Pacific context, how the second dividend is being reaped by the countries which have gone past the first dividend. So, I think Professor Giridhar was talking about Kerala, and, perhaps, Kerala could be a case where, this could be studied, but there are a lot of external factors, within Kerala, in terms of the remittances that are coming from abroad and so on and so forth. So it may not be a classical example, but I think we need to look into other countries as well. How with low level of economic development, how they have reaped the second dividend, and what were the policies related to that, and how favorable were the policies related to this. So then there is also a problem that is emerging, these days. It's more related to low fertility. So population aging and low fertility, I think, that's one way of looking at it. So there is a need for looking at, undertaking special studies related to low fertility, and it can be, backed up by qualitative research studies. Then the other important thing that
Satya, can I request you to bind up, please?
yeah, it's
Thank
just
you.
one
Thank
more
you.
slide after this. Yeah, national transfer accounts. I think this is something very important. IIPS as an institution, I don't think it was involved, but IIPS faculty did a lot of work related to national transfer accounts. I think this would be a major focus thrust area, for looking into population aging. So I think there is a need to bring in a gender dimension. See, gender dimension is important across the board. Whether neglecting women, can you achieve the demographic dividend is, something that one needs to think. And what efforts need to be made to improve the status of women is something that, we need to look into. Then research studies on health financing, mental well-being, living arrangements. These are studies that have been done, but it needs to be, seen repeatedly, and how it's changing over time is something, and it is all linked to the lopsidedness of development. Those elements, should come out, and we need to use these findings, both at the policy and programmatic level. Next slide. So here, I'll just flip through. I think we need to also look into, the social security aspects of it, although some programs are there within the country, and we also need to learn, from the European context and how it has become a burden in Europe. And studies with a potential support ratio of less than 3. That's when you say that the less than 3 situation is when labor force is shrinking. So you need to look into those aspects of it. And there is also an important area where I think UNFPA would be interested. I think it's life cycle approaches to healthy aging. This is an important area. NTA that I mentioned earlier would be an important area. So here intergenerational aspects and all need to be looked into, and a life cycle approach is something that UNFPA is considering. So, but there is more deliberation required on how to look into this aspect of it, because there is a lot of discussions that are happening within the office region and headquarters as well. Then policy and research studies on managing urbanization and migration. I think we have studied a lot on urbanization and migration, but Asia and Pacific would have 70% of its population in urban areas in 2050. And so I think one is, it's important to study from a holistic perspective the issue of urbanization and migration. And there is a lot of climate related impact in the Pacific, the East Asia and the Pacific region. So I think even India as well. So I think it's important to study these elements by integrating population dynamics with climate change. So we also need to look into the different aspects related to health, from urbanization, migration, its implication on quality of life in terms of air pollution, water pollution, sanitation, health, then climate change, implications on population displacement, food security, health and well-being. There have been few articles on, and it's estimated that there would be more than 200 million in Asia and Pacific who would be displaced due to typhoons and floods. Then I think within the climate change itself, I was thinking there is a need for using newer ICT technologies, where the spatial population distribution, you juxtapose with climate zones and zones of vulnerability, and then the past trends in natural calamities. So, this would be an important input for humanitarian planning. And there is a need for having real-time data related to the impact of climate change. Next slide, which is last, Usha. I think.
Okay, can you quickly finish it, please?
No, I think this is the most important point. I think Professor James, in his inaugural speech, was forward-looking, but the way the data is going to be collected in future is going to change. There is a lot of talk about big data within the UN. And there is also a forum on big data within the UN. So the emergence of 5G, artificial intelligence, and other frontier technologies have the potential to strengthen research, program delivery, and monitoring. So this is an area where I think IIPS should develop methodologies. See, there are a lot of issues related to this at this point in time. Confidentiality issues are there, but I think with more discussions, these things can be circumvented. So there is a need for looking into the modern ways of data capture and data analysis. And there is a need for looking into hybrid models utilizing geospatial data. So this would definitely change the way, of what we learned in the past of data capture and data processing and analysis. So I certainly feel that, based on yesterday's, discussion, IIPS should be more broad-based and not restrict to just population health. And so I think they need to move away and have a larger stake in the population and development, area. But last but not the least, there is a need to bring in this as part of, some specialized research methodology courses. And I don't think there is a need to have a data mining, masters in data mining, because it's already being offered, in various reputed institutions across the country, IITs, and, they are doing it. But with the strong knowledge of demography and population data analysis, I certainly feel the use of ICT technologies should be, tried out, and it should be part of the, curriculum of the students, and also used in survey research, and also building civil registration system in the country. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Satya. And I'm sorry I have to intervene to request you to stop a bit early, but because we have limited time. So I would now not waste any more time. I directly request Professor Niranjan Saraguti, who is the Director of the Population Council's office in India. He provides strategic direction and technical oversight to the Council's social and behavioral sciences research initiatives on RM and CAH, poverty, gender, and climate changes in India. He has also worked with the Gates Foundation for a couple of years to lead their measurement learning evaluation portfolio on RM and CAH in Uttar Pradesh. As many of us at IIPS would know, he was a student of IIPS between 1996 and 2001, and the faculty at the institute between 2001 and 2006. So he is an alumni of IIPS at present, a very, very well-recognized alumni, I must say. He is known not only in India, even internationally, for some of his very exceptional work that he has done and the publication that I have come across personally also. He is a public health researcher for almost with more than 2 decades of experience. And I wouldn't now not read out so much, because all of us can get to know about Niranjan on the Population Council website about its publication details and all that. So in the interest of time, I would rather skip that and request Professor Niranjan to talk on funding opportunities for RM and CH+A research in India. Dr. Niranjan, it's floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Usha, and thanks so much. A special thanks to you for giving me the honorary professorship. So, okay, so let me quickly go to the points on the funding opportunities for RMNCH. And it reminds me of the fact that when I was working in the area of HIV during this 2001 to 2012, there was a time when situation has come to say, do we need to continue to conduct research on HIV, because the country is making a significant progress? And do we need to have the investments for the prevention research? Do we need investments for treatment research? Do we need investments for the programs per se and the treatment? So there was a long debate. And in that process, unfortunately, the research part of the HIV program, for example, has been, it was under stress, and it also didn't get enough money to continue the research in the area of HIV. Why I'm quoting this example is also that I see some similarity that is happening with the RMNCAH. But opportunity is not lost. There are much more opportunities that are present, but the claims of the significant progress that we are making in reaching the goal number 3 on reducing the maternal mortality or reducing the child mortality, and the country that it has made on significant decline and an annual decline, in fact, even the maternal mortality, which is very hard to take on, but at the same time, it is also the development that is taking place, which I may explain the reductions in the mortality. And that should not harm the research portfolio per se, because for the reasons that I state below. In the RMNCH, what is that research that we have done? We have done a lot of research on understanding the coverage, understanding the progress that the country has made, or the states that have made in the reduction of the infant mortality, or the other improving the family planning. But what is going forward is going to be the agenda is going much deeper into these processes. The aspects of reaching that last mile, aspects of further reducing the maternal mortality. For example, do we have enough research on why the Kerala maternal mortality is not the same as the Sri Lanka? Why the Tamil Nadu, which is one of the strong health systems that of the country, even similar to the Kerala, still continues to have the comparatively relatively higher levels of maternal and neonatal mortality as compared to many of the European countries. So there are many unanswered questions. There are lots of questions that comes. Which suggests that the future funding opportunities for research, which we need to create as a community of the research organizations in the country, and there also receptivity at the donor organization level. There is also a receptivity at the various corporate social responsibility to hear what is that you can tell them, which can further contribute to the progress in the sustainable development goals. Especially I'm talking about the goal number 3. So I'll not go into the details of the reproductive health, sexual and reproductive health, because I'm sure Anand must have covered the range of the research ideas in that area. But I'll go into the deeper into the maternal and newborn health and the child health. And my biggest favorite topic is the adolescent health. For the last 20 to 25 years, in fact, for the past 20 years, the focus of research in the area of maternal health or the neonatal health was around the intrapartum and institutional delivery based focused to try and understand what the immediate after delivery practices are, what are the antenatal care practices are, and how the institutional delivery is making a progress. But going forward, what is going to be an opportunity for research? The opportunity exists not specifically, not continuing to conduct research or try and answer these questions on the intrapartum and institutional delivery focus, but more on the structural determinants, because those distal determinants are going to define the further reduction in the maternal mortality or the neonatal mortality. So when I say that those distal, what are those distal determinants? It may be the human resources, the supply chains, the death reviews, the budgeting. So there are large scope that exist for research in those areas. If we continue to create proposals that on the coverage and conducting surveys on the typical areas of work is not going to be funded, what is required is to find those structural determinants which can actually contribute. And the other focus opportunity that exists, which IIPS can do very well, are IIPS like institutions, including us at Pop Council, we can do is the small area estimations. Given the Niti Aayog's focus on these smaller geographies, and right now they're at the district level, going forward it is going to the sub-district level or to the block level or to the village level, where your surveys do not have that data, and research needs to happen, and the data capture that needs to take place very innovatively with all those technology innovations that are happening out in the market, to create that data to actually talk about the small area estimation, whether you do it indirect estimation based on the pooling of several data resources, or is it that you actually define and collect the routine data to talk about. And this is the focus of the research, and many states in fact want to do it. It's not about the national interest, but at the state level interest. I think for institutions like IIPS is also to really go to these states and talk about how the small area estimations in the area of maternal, newborn, and child health can help. The other areas which not many researchers have done it in India, there is some research globally that is happening, but not so much. We could not crack the understanding around the hard to change behaviors. When I say the hard to change behaviors, they'll refer to the postnatal care. They refer to the full antenatal care, the IFA consumption. They had referred to the certain treatment practices for child in case of the morbidity. So how about those hard to change behaviors, either within the individual's control or with the system's control, is something that is unexplored area, and is a great funding opportunity in that specific focus. And then while you do a lot of the population based research, but what going forward is going to be less funding to the population based surveys. The funding is going to be more towards how you use the existing data in understanding the different platforms in making the RMNCH progress. To give you an example, one is the health systems focus. There is a huge rethinking that is happening. There is a research that is taking place, and in the context of, and this is the one of the learnings from our the COVID research, the effect of COVID that happened, that the health systems require clarity and what that primary care looks like and how that primary care can be strengthened. And there is a huge need for research in the health systems and financing in that area. And I don't want to take much time, but I can answer any questions that you may have. But on the child health, child nutrition, there are still child nutrition, a lot to work on, especially on the stunting and the wasting. And Praveen is here, who is a master in talking about the nutrition aspects. But the focus will continue to be on the nutrition, at least for the next 5 to 7 years, if not more. And that is going to be an anemia Mukt Bharat. People are talking, there are lots of programs happening, but we don't much see the improvement in anemia. And a huge funding opportunity that exists either at the national level or even to the states into continuing the research around the anemia. And I actually am a fan of this adolescent health research, mainly because that is the generation, and that is the generation which is going to define how the future of the country is going to be. And there are not many investments except a few of the donor organizations like Packard Foundation, who has been investing a lot on the adolescent sexual reproductive health, and also to some extent the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and in the past MacArthur Foundation has done it, the investments. But the adolescent health and development with, as Satya said, as a life course approach, is actually going to really take a huge jump. And now country started seeing the need for working with this welcome generation, they call it as the generation that's going to define SDG and SDG plus after 2030. And the areas are multiple. The area of education or health or entrepreneurship or the data, but what the research need is to make it multidimensional. It's not about the siloed research, but about the multidimensional research in that specific area. If I have to summarize the whole comment that I made, I would actually look at one which we all look at is the thematic area focus research, which is the RMNCA, and the other is the simple survey-based research, which we are masters in doing it, but we need to go beyond that to have that cross-cutting area focus research on the inequities, on the small area geographies, and on the most vulnerable population, and on the critical issues that are not very not the ones that are that we have done in the past, but it's going to be define the future. The other is the platform-based research, the primary care health systems, and the fourth and most important is the deep in-depth research on CMONC behaviors or maternal death reviews, or the multi-dimensionality of the vulnerabilities that we currently have. So with that, I'll stop here, but happy to answer any questions that if you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niranjan. So we have completed 4 presentations. Now I'll request Dr. Praveen Agrawal to serve as discussant for the session. And Dr. Praveen Agrawal is a senior MEL expert at the IPE Global Health, I suppose, and is leading the MEL team of Rajpusht project. He has a PhD in population studies from IIPS. Prior to joining IPE Global, he was monitoring and evaluation specialist in UNICEF till November 2020, where he designed and led the implementation of the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, known as CNNS. He has over 20 years of monitoring and evaluation experience at the national and international level, including Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the International Planned Parenthood Federation, where he involved himself in designing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating large-scale health and nutrition surveys, programs, and the data analytics. His areas of research is to promote international implementation research, data-driven, evidence-based program and policy for maternal, adolescent, child, and newborn healthcare, nutrition, micronutrients deficiencies, and non-communicable diseases. Praveen has authored number of articles in peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, and scientific reports. Praveen, I request you to summarize the key issues in 4 presentation and also bring in your perspective on future funding opportunities for research in areas particularly related to nutrition. Thank you very much, Praveen, and floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for adding me in this important session. And I will take very less time because time is shooting up. So, I mean, just to summarize 4 presentation, I'm starting with Dr. Giridhar, where he presented like how we have to scan the demand and then accordingly supply on different various implementation research. And also like Dr. Satya has listed out so many research which are important in view of using the new technology and environment and everything. Dr. Niranjan covered about the coverage, which is more important, and also the use of the data. And again, Anand suggested in view funder. Not going that because of time.
Turn off your video, your voice is breaking, Praveen.
We see the different, a huge funding for innovation, science, and solution oriented. You have a huge, and if you honor budget, like compare the government, if you talk about 60,000 crore plus. Five major domain of the budget, which is like 60,000 crore from health, 10,000 plus in nutrition, another domain, and the overall donor funding is 100,000 crore. So there is a huge opportunity to tap those research funding from universities, private sectors, even the government, ministries, even state government. Those are the area. But what I feel in terms of area of research, we have ample academic research based on data and large data and other data. And we know what are the challenges in different domains listed by other speakers. But what is missing? What is missing is what is the solution, right? I mean, solution-oriented research, we are doing little less. What is the need of time? Because we have said SDG, then MDGs, and still we will miss the bus if we are not making our research more solution-oriented. Because we know the dietary diversity. I will talk a little bit of nutrition, which was not much discussed. Like we do had malnutrition problem. Then we added overnutrition problem. Then we have added micronutrient deficiency and NCDs problem, like triple burden. But where is the solution? What we are thinking about the solution? We know a little bit of behavior change communication, little bit of lifestyle changes will change that. So how we are reaching to the larger miles or even like irrespective of the socioeconomic status, how the social and behavior communication change is reaching, how the interpersonal communication, which is led by frontline functionary, how they are reaching, what are the challenges, how, I mean, that's where the actual pilot maybe in different research already together with program, which can be scalable, can be a agenda item for the research. And there are ample funding available. If you see the different program implementer at different levels who are running like 10 million, $15 million projects that do have like a good proportion of their budget to do a implementation research or regular MIS based on what are working, what is not working, where to invest more, how to change the social and behavior change messages based on the implementation, what are the implementation and why some district or some area is working and some area is not working, how we are training our frontline functionaries. So those kind of implementation science, what I see is a huge opportunity in terms of real solution orientation. Also, not like always missing the bus of our new targets by different agencies, right? So then what I listed in terms of what is missing and what is the need, and then how will be the solution. We talk too much about, I mean, always you talk about enable, IT enabled program, app based, and also GIS based. So once we do the data quality, not only research and data, but also the program, whether our frontline functionary, they are reaching to the household or not, whether they are really going and making an interpersonal communication or not, how our mass media is reaching out for a different domain of program. So those are the area which is, I mean, domain can be any, I mean, it's nutrition, health, or any, but I mean, the tool, the reach out system can be that. And there we have a huge gap of learning, and also in different area has a different specific problem. And also the huge opportunity about the social media. I mean, once you see now mass media or even print media is reaching too less, but social media is everyone's hand now. So how we are using those social media in terms of research and also implementation to make the solution of the problem. So I mean, that kind of evidence-based research should be the priority of the hour, and the IIPS can contribute huge given the kind of system, the kind of faculty, the kind of student they are coming, and the system has to be enabling. What I feel, we sometimes make those system which turns as a project, but once we make ready for it scalability, it's fail in make it scale, scale at a scale. So it has to be owned by the system. It has to be owned on the system platform rather than the parallel platform. So those area we have huge funding. But I can give some example, either working from UN or working in IP Global from last 1 year. Like system do want that kind of research, and they also invest huge money in research, also in funding also. Like I had presented few months before how the low birth weight, for example, one of the nutrition issue, 1/3 baby are low birth weight, but we don't have data. So a simple implementation at grassroots, monitoring, then engaging with government can make the pitch, okay, this is the problem. 1/3 child are being low birth weight, not just 17%. So that is those are the area. And how can I mean, the whole focus of the research should be on solution, not making many papers, many similar kind of report where there is no much new evidence is coming from implementation. That, and there are I mean, you list are endless where people are looking forward, trying to invest, and making the pitch. So I mean, with this note, making how to work, what is the solution, that is my demand and my personal agenda. Plus what I see in the field, that is where people can do a huge change and huge contribution. Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Praveen. Now, we have almost officially reached the scheduled time of the session, but I hope these organizers would appreciate the kind of speakers that we have got in the session, and extend our session by at least 15 minutes so that we can have some participation and discussion from many of our attendees, because I'm sure they would have some questions that they would want to raise to the speakers. So I'll take that liberty, even not seeking permission, that we would extend it by 15 minutes. Thank you, Archana. So I request all of those who are attending the session to raise your questions or comments or suggestions or even additions to whatever or what is already being discussed by the four panelists, which is relevant to the session to raise here. So please go ahead. You can unmute yourself or request to unmute yourself, and I'm sure ICT would facilitate that. Then you can raise your questions. Alternatively, you can put them in the chat box and I shall read it out. Whichever way is convenient, please do so. Thank you very much. So looking forward to your participation from attendees, please. I'm scrolling down if there is anything. So there is a question that I can read out from the chat box by Ms. Shumoni Mukherjee. And it says that another specific area which probably needs some space in future research areas is relating to mental health. And particularly during pandemic situation, the issues around mental health have emerged as one of the key areas. And if any of the speaker can elaborate upon that, that would be useful. So any of the four panelists who are, or including moderator, if anybody would want to take it up.
Anand, you want to comment on it?
I thought you were going to take it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. The mental health has been an important area of work in for many years, and the COVID actually has brought the mental health into the forefront because it affected in many population in many different ways. It has affected the population in different age groups, which is what is going to be the major thrust area going forward. While there are interventions, there are ways that organizations have been working on to address the mental health issues in the geographies, but there is no structured research that can actually identify what the problem is with different population groups and at what levels do we stand in terms of the mental health issues, and what needs to be done to address those key critical problems. What we have the data on the research is from NIMHANS and the surveys that they have done in select states, about 9 or 10 states, but we don't actually have anything at the country level. And there have been discussions in the research fraternity on how to do the mental health research and the mental health in from many different population perspectives. And I agree that it's going to be the an important area of work, but we don't know what the problem is and what the key questions that we should ask for mental health research.
Yeah,
thank you, Niranjan. Next question would be by Mr. Joel Rana. So if ICT can unmute this person, he would want to ask the question.
Thank you,
Mr.
ma'am,
Joel, if you
for
are, yes, please
allowing
go
me.
ahead.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Very much.
Yes. Am I audible, ma'am?
Very much.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask a question. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I have seen a lot of discussion on different issues which are relevant to address the problem, the real problem, and to the efforts to achieve the sustainable development goals. So my question is very practical. Perhaps this may be a silly question. So this is important for me, that young researcher like me, perhaps I have one or two research idea, and that is relevant to solving a real problem. And I want to approach some research funder. So what would be the procedure to approach those funding agency to get attention. Thank you.
Any of the panelists can take up the question if they would want to respond.
Sorry.
Satya, you are muted. If you want to respond, you have to unmute Satya.
Anand wants to comment.
Sure, Anand, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, as I understand it, the question was how should one, what can one do to sort of approach a funding organization, or how should one go about it? I think it goes back to the point that, Dr. Girdhar said, is that understand the priorities of the funding agency. Just spend some time to sort of understand, and I think each funding agency tends to have slightly unique sort of set of, priorities and focus areas. And so once you begin to understand that, is probably one step of it. And then I think the second part is just to sort of also understand the research that has happened in that, because I think these are two of the things that I face quite a lot, is when I see researchers approach us, is that one, the researchers will often approach us with issues that are not really core to the issues that maybe the foundation that I work for is thinking. So my job often becomes to say, okay, maybe you should talk to some other person in some other foundation who is more interested in that issue. And then the second issue is often just the fact that the kind of ideas or research proposal that people will give I will often say, well, I know of 2 other papers, or I know of 3 other research sort of existing studies that that already replicate it. And I'm sorry, these are very, very simple sort of issues, but they're, I don't know, as someone who works in a funding agency, these are things that we see quite very, very commonly. So it's just some of those basics to be understood maybe might be helpful.
Nivedita Roy, and her question is about, in terms of reproductive health rights, postpartum family planning. These are big public health concerns in India. She, as a young researcher, would like to know how to explore this particular topic and what outcomes should be examined.
Does anyone want
to indicators now what to examine? One is just to keep quiet. I'm sorry. I'm provoking you guys.
I can go on about this for quite a long time.
Okay.
Sorry, Satya, please. Sorry.
No, Niranjan is better placed to answer this specific RH question.
I think both of you are much better than me, and Anand can speak on this topic for several hours. But I think from the perspective of it's a postpartum family planning it's an issue that it's a big concern. One, for the reason that that there are very limited acceptance for the postpartum family planning so far. Only when our country, for example, in India, the postpartum family planning became the focus in 2010. Since then, there has been research as well as the programmatic initiative from Government of India to understand how do we address the contraceptive needs during the postpartum period. What does that mean, and which contraceptive methods are people most likely to accept, and what can be done. I mean, if you want to really undertake a research in this specific area, the focus could be more on the understanding the quality of care in postpartum family planning, because that's something that is emerging for a variety of reasons, whether it is the program induced reasons, or maybe the otherwise the lack of enough understanding in that. The quality of care, the equity in the postpartum family planning, that's something that needs to be studied, and yeah, there is a lot to do on that. So from the outcomes perspective, those are the issues that I would look at if I am doing that research.
Thank you,
Anand,
Niranjan.
Satya?
Can
Usha,
ICT
just
unmute
adding
Dr.
to
DP Singh? He wants to ask a question.
Usha,
Can
just
ICT
adding to Niranjan.
Oh, you want to add to Niranjan? Chalo, pehle Satya, hold on to Dr. DP Singh for a while. Yes,
No,
please, Satya.
the thing is, you need to be smart enough, and the postpartum period is very critical, as Niranjan mentioned. The quality of care, he did talk about it. See, if you look into the maternal mortality definition, MMR, so the 42 days period is going to be very critical. So I think you need to look from that perspective, and also be smart enough to bring in newborns there, where two agencies can get together. UNICEF can get together, UNFPA can get together, and other donors can get together. So I think you need to be smart enough to, play around with your proposal. And these are the key factors. The postpartum period is the a key factor that can determine the maternal mortality, impact on maternal mortality, morbidity as well as mortality. So I think you have to be smart enough to place your proposal in such a way that it can attract the mandate of several donor agencies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satya. So the last question from Dr. DP Singh, if ICT can unmute him, please, because we have just 2 minutes left with us now.
Yeah, actually,
ICT,
it's
yes.
a very brief question. I'm audible?
Yes, very much, DP.
Yeah.
DP, very
So
much.
it's a very brief question. What I see, especially out of these three main issues which were there in 80s, fertility, mortality, and migration research, and always migration got a very the last kind of. Now the whole focus has changed. Around 2000, everything related to something like health and all is a good thing. I'm not opposing it that you don't do it, but always when I see that like research or even this large scale like IIPS also involved in NFHS, all this one, they also give a very what is called no importance at all. So otherwise we don't know whether we talk in a terms of many of I've seen like Tata Institute also did some research from Population Council related to something like qualitative research, something in MP and all this one. But kind of what I see that the importance which like government or other agency also give to this issue, because this is the now I feel that is the main issue. That people are migrating, labor are migrating. Only migration got a importance. Something like a person like Irdharajan, he got a big funding in Kerala. So they know more about that. But what is happening to our mainland? People have become now they are left, and also like so that way I'm saying that how to improve that. Because it remains all over the world. Migration is the most important component. But let's not give that much kind of, or maybe I don't know. Maybe there is not that many researchers who are interested in the migration. You see the IIPS itself, you will find out total students involved in various research or their PhD and all this one. Only maybe 5%, 10% doing something on this one. Many are involved in those various. Otherwise, I don't think that I should ask actually this is relevant to funding. Funding it one need to develop the issue in a very proper manner and submit it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. DP Singh. Would anybody want to respond to each question or?
I think
so I will respond.
Yes, please.
No, I just want to respond. I think this research on migration or whatever it is, I think migration is not among the three components of population growth. You are all working on fertility and mortality. Migration is in the last seat, but probably the coming years, it will be a major topic, and you have to see to it how we can link that topic with the other indicators. Because if you go and ask even IIPS to do a migration survey, they may say we are not interested. So can we think of migration as a variable which affects every aspect? Like I think someone rightly said among the speakers on child health, on reproductive side, like you can put them in the main basket. I think probably then there will be a lot of opportunities for funding because migrants are not in the mainstream of the development still. Like we used to talk about mainstreaming gender into development. We have done, I think we are reaching some level right now. So we have to mainstream migration into development, probably then we'll get a lot of funds. It is not being done.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is going to happen for in the maybe another few years.
Thank you, Rajan. Quickly, 1 minute to Dr. Satya. He wanted to say something.
No,
Satya, 1 minute only, Dada.
Yeah. The thing is, I think the past studies, dealt more directly to migration and urbanization. I think there is a need for juxtaposing, migration with, other elements that Rajan has correctly pointed out.
Absolutely.
And one of the major things that is emerging now is humanitarian data and climate change. And its implications on migration and urbanization, so you need to have those interlinkages, and definitely with the COVID, advent of COVID, I think there will be a lot of migration-related research and its implications, COVID implications on it. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think in agenda they have also mentioned about GAM member for some thanks or something. So if that is still there, then please go ahead. Otherwise, I can conclude the session.
Thank you, Professor Usa. I think I will take a vote of thanks for all of them. I think I want to thank Usa basically for organizing this particular session. I think it's a very important session because I think many people are looking for what to do, what type of research is emerging. I think we got really good discussion on it because I'm listening to all the almost for 1.5 hours. And I also would like to thank the speakers. Of course, all of them I know, except probably the Mr. Sinha, because I have not approached you for any funding. Probably now I'll approach on migration and what is called the family planning. Otherwise, I know all the Niranjan, Satya, Giridhar, I know them for maybe donkey years. So I know them, but when Musa told me he's also inviting Mr. Sinha, I said, absolutely, please go ahead. So we have excellent speakers. I think probably all of them have benefited by that. And we would like to thank all the speakers and the organizer and also our Praveen, who has also given some type of what is called adding value to all the speakers. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone for joining. We'll break it and we'll go for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, one and all. Thank you for all the good deliberations and participation. Much appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Giridhar sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.